The Hero of the Wild, being the long-awaited final link and most recent via the games, this link has 3 games and no manga. Those games being Breath of the Wild, Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity, and finally Tears of the Kingdom. This will be our 9th and final entry into our adventure through the Zelda Timeline. We will also not really be talking about Tears of the Kingdom because JoJo stated that it will take place after Linked Universe, as in Wild will be like Time in a way, where he is currently between games. For Time, it's Majora's Mask and Twilight Princess, and for Wild, he will be between Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. Now, before we start talking about the games, let's reiterate what we are doing here. We will be going over how JoJo had characterized Wild in her comic Linked Universe, a comic series that follows 9 links answering the question, what would happen if all the links had to adventure together? I'll be going over every link in the comic, and you can catch episode 0 where I explain what we are doing here in greater detail down below. I'll also be adding the next episode being our recap episode when that is done down below as well. Let's start out one last time with the game recap. Now there are technically 3 games here, but we aren't going to be touching Tears of the Kingdom because that's in future events, and Hyrule Warriors Age of Calamity is kind of an alternate universe. So we're only gonna be talking about Breath of the Wild. Link awakens in the Shrine of Awakening with no memory, a voice telling him to wake up, telling him where to go and what to do. He soon meets an old man who teaches him how this world works, and when asked to go to the top of the Temple of Time, the old man reveals to Link that he is none other than the last king of Hyrule, before Calamity Ganon killed him and destroyed the kingdom. And the voice was Zelda, speaking to Link from where she was sealing Ganon away in the castle. Link is tasked to awaken the 4 divine beasts and puts an end to Calamity Ganon, saving Princess Zelda. Throughout the game, Link can unlock shrines as well as find memories. He can reclaim the Master Sword if he has over 13 hearts, otherwise it will kill him. But in these memories, Link will learn of the events that took place in the past in more detail, learning that he was Zelda's appointed knight, how he protected her from the Yiga, and how the two slowly became friends. He also learned of who the champions used to be. Mipha, the Zora champion who knew him as a child, Daruk, the Goron champion, who seemed to be friends with him beforehand, Ravali, the Ritu champion, who was kind of a jerk to Link, and Urbosa, the Gerudo champion, who was friends with Zelda. We also see the King of Hyrule be kind of a dick to his daughter, who is trying to unlock her sealing powers. But it's not really going well. In the end, Zelda was able to unlock the power to seal the darkness, only after Link was almost killed. Throughout the game, you end up meeting multiple people, as well as helping them take back the divine beasts. And in the end, Link is able to save Zelda and defeat Ganon, only for her to say, "Do you really remember me?" We all know the answer to that. From here on out, we will be referring to Link as his hero title, the Hero of the Wild. Design. The Hero of the Wild has a lot of outfits throughout his game, but only one is the outfit that we see him in the comic, and that is his champion's tunic. It's seen through his memories and used as his official outfit. In-game, Link's outfit is a blue tunic with a white sword design on the front. He has a white shirt underneath, along with cream gloves with fun designs and short brown gloves underneath that. His pants are tan with brown boots. Link doesn't have his signature hat, but instead has long hair in a ponytail. Now, in Linked Universe, he wears his blue tunic with the white sword design, but there is a light and dark blue checkered pattern splitting it into 4 sections. Also, his tunic is way more flowy than what we have in Breath of the Wild. His white undershirt is more of a cream, and he still has his tan pants and brown boots. Lastly, his hair is still in a ponytail, but it's much longer than it is in-game. Lastly, we can visibly see scars from when Link had gotten injured, leaving behind not only mental scars, but physical ones as well. Also, Wild is seen wearing his black cape, but it's much larger and longer than in-game as well. Lastly, JoJo has made a 2.0 version of Wild's outfit in her style. This hadn't been seen in comic, but it's just a fun design she did. The tunic is almost the same except for the chainmail underneath, as well as a little bit of armor like in the in-game Hylian's tunic, along with a pauldron and a sash like both Sky and Twilight wear. We also see him with his cape again. We've also seen a Tears of the Kingdom design from JoJo. Again, not really a part of the analysis. I just wanted to talk about it. The green fabric faded into blue brings together the old and new designs very well. Okay, let's get back on topic. In-game, Wild has a wide array of weapons and abilities he can use, but because there are so many, we're only going to be talking about the ones that we've seen so far in the comic. We have seen a sword and shield, the bow, a staff/stick, as well as a kitchen knife. The kitchen knife is because he is the chef of the group, and of course he has to have one. But the sword and shield are seen like in-game, cutting and slashing. We even see him climb up on the back of Club Moblin to try and stab it from above. We also see later on him use and destroy a sword after using stasis on the Dink armor. We also see another sword break on a rock as well, and when Wild used the Master Sword, it also broke. But don't worry, she got better. While sparring with Twilight, he lost his shield, leaving the staff or stick, which we see him get kicked in the face using, and his bow, the only things he has left. The bow he uses most often. We even see him joking about doing tricks with it, but it's his primary weapon and he's the best using it. Hopefully it doesn't break. The others all have noticed how he breaks everything he touches, and they know not to give him anything that's actually valuable, or it'll break, like in game. Magic effects. Wild is 117 years old, and that is because of the Shrine of Resurrection. We know that his injuries from trying to save Zelda when Ganon's forces first attacked were healed, only scarring over, but what are the effects that could have arisen from this method of healing? Well, we know he has amnesia, and we have seen in the comic Wild getting one of these memories back. One where he was swimming in a river. This shows the effects of his memories and the lack thereof, obtaining memories from places he's been. He's also commented on the fact that he feels like he is weaker than what he was before, which most of these magic effects are things that we've seen in game. The hero of the wild is a kind and caring person who's scared to lose those he loves. He'll do anything to keep those he holds dear close. He'll take hits for them and jump in to save them. If someone is hurt, he worries for them. He can't lose anyone else. But at that same time, he's lost the feeling of pressure and responsibility that was forced upon him at a young age because of his memory loss, resulting in the hero of the wild acting, well, wild, losing the shackles of society and just being tasked to stop the calamity caused by a failure he can barely remember, leaving him with the feeling of newfound freedom, changing him into the person we know now. Wild can't fail again. Even without the full memory of what happened, he knows he failed, and because of that and the feeling of loss, he has to protect those around him even at the cost of his own health. Let's start with how Wild sees his equipment, namely the Master Sword. She once let him wield her willingly, but after his failure, she now forces him to prove himself. When the chain is talking about the Master Sword and how she wouldn't hurt one of her wielders, Wild comments on how she has a high standard and how it's better to prove ourselves before we fool ourselves. And later on, talking about how she didn't care about injuring one of her wielders. This is because in-game, Link needs 13 hearts to even pull the Master Sword, or else she will kill him. This is shown that he blames himself on his failure, as well as agrees with her on not letting him wield her again unless if he proves he's worthy. His other equipment are just tools for him to use, like using a sword on a stone and snapping it in two. He does admit he wants to try and make sure the new sword 4 and the others made for him won't break, so hopefully he'll treat his equipment better. Something to note is the fact that Wild is the team chef. He is seen cooking most of the meals throughout the comic so far, and is shown gathering more food as well. Like when Twilight stopped him from hunting more so he doesn't overhunt, or when Legend shot his arrow out of the sky to protect a seagull. Wild is also shown helping Malin cook while they are visiting Long Long Ranch. He's the chef, and he'll make sure everyone is full. There's also the fact that he's made potions for the chain, as well as when Twilight was injured. He knew Hyrule needed energy to heal, and Twilight also desperately needed energy as well. So he of course made them energy potions. Rip Frog. Ripperoni, rest in pepperoni frog. He looks after them in the ways he knows how. Now, Wild is, well, a bit wild. He's seen sneaking off with Hyrule to explore caves, as well as when he wanted to see how many arrows he could shoot before hitting the ground, not landing. He also likes to go off trail, as well as likes to joke with the others, or when he jumped into the water with a knife in his mouth while Time, Twi, and Wind were fishing. He's just a little out there, even being referenced in his memory showing Wild thinking about shield surfing down a mountain only wearing his shorts. He really does live up to his name. There's also the fact that he just doesn't care to be messed with. When warriors stole his Vey clothes, he ended up throwing Goron spices into the food. He doesn't like being messed with, but he'll mess with the others. And when someone calls him out, he'll only listen if it's one of the leader types of the chain. And that itself is still a maybe. Adding in the fact that he steals weapons, Wild is definitely the chain's wild card in and outside of battle. Let's talk a little about Wild's memory. He lost it because of the 100 years in the Shrine of Resurrection, meaning he really only has a little over a year of life experience. And during that time, he definitely did everything he could. But when seeing places where old memories could be dug up, his mind stops him and forces him to remember the events. In-game, characters would mention how he just kind of stood there for a minute, but in the comic, we actually see the outside of this event, how he just stops and stares. After Wild admits how much of a different person he is from him, referring to his past self, showing how he doesn't even consider himself the same person as before because of how different he is now. Whenever we see Wild talk about or reference his lost memories, he is always somber, desperately holding on to the fragments he has. But in the end, he knows he had people watching out for him and rooting for him. Lastly, we know his memories are actively coming back to him, as well as being forgotten in dreams. Nightmares prevalent with forgotten memories, which means this may not be the last time we see him retrieve an old memory. Continuing off of a Wild's memory is how he reacted to Twilight being injured. He watched Twilight go down and needed to be carried off the battlefield. Then when asked how he was doing, he was promptly informed he wasn't healing even with a fairy. Fear and worry bubbled up, reminding him of the past and how he wasn't able to save the other champions. In that moment, anger was written clearly across his face, emotion taking over him, jumping in, using the Sheikah Slate and using stasis, then using a fury of blows that snapped his unfinished sword in half, defeating the Iron Knuckle and scattering the rest of the enemies. He then ran off to town, where he ran into Four. Wild asked Four how Twilight was doing, and Four was mainly upset that he left the others without helping more. In the end, Four tried to stop Wild from going and seeing Twilight, hoping he would calm down first. But when Wild shoved past Four, Four split. With the confusion of seeing this for the first time, along with how each of the colors reminded him of one of the champions he lost, Wild needed a minute and had to leave. He had a full traumatic breakdown in the forest outside of town, and after calming down and collecting himself, he cooked up some potions to try and help the others the best he can. And when he finally was able to see Twilight, he gives him the pep talk of the century, telling him he needs to fight, and when he finally sees that he's better, his eyes light up, he's happy. But he also admits that he cannot lose one last friend after talking about how he lost his way in all this. Later on, he even apologizes to Four. He knows he made a mistake, but he can't lose anyone else, not a single one. This arc in the story for Wild shows his trauma clear as day and how he's trying to deal with it. But sometimes he just needs a good hug. He's trying to be strong, but sometimes he just has to crumble, and none of the others blame him for this. They've admitted that long ago before these events even happened. He'll do his best to help even when hope is almost lost. He will be holding on the best he can, refusing to let a single one down. Now, I know we all want to talk about Wild and Twilight and how they are brothers, but we need to talk about how Wild sees the rest of the chain first, in order, like we do every time, starting with Sky. Gonna be honest, most of their interactions have been the Master Sword, as Wild knows the old stories about the voice being heard from inside the sword. Sky is the only one he could ask who actually has the answer. Then there's the time that Wild broke the Master Sword, only for her to reappear in Sky's sheath. The only times they've really talked to one another were when it was about about the Master Sword. Otherwise, it was in passing or in a big group where they weren't really talking to each other. On to 4. At the beginning, the two of them were 2 of the 3 who knew Twilight's secret. When Legend found out, the 2 were occupied with figuring out what happened with Wild's weapons, and 4 decided to take on the challenge of making an unbreakable sword for Wild, which the unfinished version broke while Wild destroyed the Iron Knuckle. 4 splitting did confuse Wild, but in doing so also makes him the only member of the chain, other than 4, who knows about the power of the 4 sword. And I guess Legend, but that's a different case. Also, 4 doesn't hold grudges, so when Wild went to apologize, 4 had already gotten over their argument and fixed Wild's sword. The 2 of them get along fairly well, and even more so now that Wild has a working sword. Next is Time. He is the leader of the chain, and Wild speaks to him with a little respect, but mostly casually. He does tend to listen more and talk less when Time is involved, but Wild still shines in his moments. But at that same time, he still runs over to him with questions like, "What if a Pono just turned into some lady?" He still himself went around Time, and Wild knows Time is intimidating, but that doesn't stop him from trying to do his best. Now with Legend, I'm just gonna jump into this. I've been waiting to talk about these 2 for a while. I held off on Legend's video because I wanted you all to have more context for Wild before diving into these 2. The biggest difference between them is how they handle the loss in their lives. Legend is the definition of, "I'll bottle it up all right here, then one day I'll die." Where Wild is along the lines of had already died and can only find the broken bottle, and where are these feelings coming from? So he can't hide what he did back before he was killed. The overwhelming feeling of something just not being right, but he just can't put his finger on it, no matter how hard he tries. They both consider the people they were before as completely different as well as they are now. But they also don't tend to see eye to eye, both taking on adventuring differently. One wanting a map, the other just going where he thinks would be cool. They both act as a foil to the other, ending up as different sides of the same coin. Next is Hyrule. The 2 get along pretty well. They both like to explore without a map and see the world. They've ran off and gotten themselves lost in a cave before, only for Twilight to save them. These 2 are both known for their games being able to explore literally anything, seeing the world and going where your heart desires. And throughout the comic, the 2 have shown this aspect of their games together fairly well. Also, I just find it funny that Ruli has cottagecore vibes but lives in a cave, where Wild has cavecore vibes but lives in a cottage. They complete each other. With Twilight, Wild remembers the wolf that traveled with him and aided him in his journey across Hyrule. When he met said wolf during the events of the comic, he didn't expect to see that he was just some guy, let alone figure out that he will become his closest brother. From the start, Wild was close with Twilight, who looked after him in return. When Wild had a nightmare or his memories acted up, Twilight would be there for him, giving him any form of comfort he could. Wild and Twilight are seen together at any chance they can, glued at the hip. Wild also knows Twilight's secret as well as knows about Midna. They know the most about one another, and it really shows. Wild seems to be most comfortable around Twilight as well, being the most lighthearted when interacting around him. And when Twilight was injured and Wild's trauma reared his ugly head, he had to calm down without Twilight. He ends up going into the forest to calm down, coming back with newfound determination to try and help. He'll do anything for his brothers, especially his favorites. To Wind, the 2 tend to butt heads. Wind thinks he understands the King of Hyrule, where Wild thinks he's full of it. But at the same time, they're seen hanging out, hit one another with their Korok leaves, sending gusts of wind at one another, as well as accidentally throwing the other. We also see Wild save Wind from getting injured. This being said, they may not agree on everything, but they still look out for one another, and they still get along most of the time. With Warriors, Wild is shown treating him like a captain before Warriors stopped him. We even catch Wild seemingly almost doing a salute to Warriors when he yelled at him in Entrance 2. The 2 were knights but Warriors is the only one who remembers between the two of them, and he doesn't get after Wild for not doing knightly things. But what he does get after him about is when he's joking in a serious moment. Again, in Entrance 2, when Wild was joking about Legend's warnings, Warrior sides with Legend that they need to be careful. And only after that is when Wild actually somewhat listens. But when things aren't serious, Warriors will joke around with Wild, like stealing his Vague clothes. They seem to butt heads often, but that's because of how they react in different situations. One jokes and the other gets serious. And Warriors is what Wild sees as a perfect knight, what he should have been. But that doesn't mean their only interactions are bad, there's still hope for them yet. I feel like there's something missing. Warriors is the last one this time. Oh my goodness. We don't have to go and talk about Wild because we're already talking about Wild. Alright, we're gonna move on. Secrets. Most of Wild's secrets have been out in the open, with him commenting on the fact that he can't really hide anything, gesturing to his scars across his face. Wild is one of the most open characters in the chain. Only type of secret he has are the ones he himself doesn't really know about, or the fact that he knows other people's secrets. Like when he was talking about Twilight's in the comic, he had already met him in the past, but this was Twilight's first time meeting him. Over time, Wild will most likely talk more about his past, but for now, we haven't seen it yet. The Year of the Wild, after getting a second chance, refuses to fail again. He works for everything he has, even then, nothing stays forever. Like how his weapons break on him. Friends and companions may come and go, but he'll hold on to them as best he can. Not able to lose anyone else, he would risk anything for them, taking hits and jumping into fights in a blind emotional fury, or making sure they have the potions they need to survive. He does his best. He feels as if he needs to compensate for his past failures by proving to the others he's someone they can rely on. But in doing so, he tends to act out, wandering off with Hyrule or showing off tricks he can do. He just wants to prove he should be here. But he does belong. Adding up the amount of times he's stepped in to save another member of the chain, he has the highest saves throughout. Jumping in with his bow and taking hits, he has to save them all. But Wild's still someone who is no longer chained to the society that raised him in his forgotten memories, leaving him to live up to his title, Wild, but proving to us all that he is the champion. Thank you all for watching. I hope you all enjoyed this video series. I can't believe we finally finished the last installation of our 9-part character analysis series. Wow! Oh my goodness. Now, before people start clicking off, I will inform you that I plan to make an episode 10 going over everything I missed, some clarifications, and adding to earlier episodes. Also, JoJo has said in a podcast she appeared on that the Zeldas will be joining, so I might be back sooner than you expected. Not me already jotting down what chapters mention the other Zeldas. But anyways, thank you JoJo for this amazing comic. I cannot wait to see what comes up next. If you all watching want to read the comic, a link to that will be in the description below, so please go and check it out. Now, what are we going to do after this? Well, after episode 10, we have a few videos planned that aren't Linked Universe related. I plan on making a few videos on the Legend of Zelda Timeline and how it actually does make sense. And if you've been around in my streams, then you know that I plan on hunting down the exact moment the Downfall Timeline was created. The official Nintendo answer of, it could be anywhere between when Link wakes up at the beginning and to when he defeats Ganon at the end, doesn't really sit right with me. This will mostly be done in our Ocarina of Time playthrough, and we plan on doing a playthrough of every Zelda game. Currently, we've made our way mostly through the Downfall Timeline. Other things I'll be making soon is a Kingdom Hearts video essay series where I break down the lore and story of the game in a way people old and new of the series can easily understand. And I know it's a hard task, but if you've gotten this far in this video and this video series, then you know how I break things down, and I assure you that I can take you by the hand and guide you through this series in the least confusing way possible. Lastly, I stream every day, so if you want to hang out and chat, a link to that will be in the description below as well. Until next time, guys. Bye-bye! Okay, for the secret ending in the chapter Sister, this is a reference to how they planned to give Wild a sister but ended up scrapping it. It's cool how JoJo referenced that. There's also the fact that when Wild has his hood up, it means he's upset. It's actually really fun if you go back through and watch when his hood is up or not. It is in moments that he is upset. Wild also does the side-on thing in Dawn Part 3. And for the last little secret, it's the reason I started putting this section in the video. It's because there's so many details that I just don't know where else to put them all, except some secret little ending bit as a miscellaneous section in the video. And yes, every episode has one of these sections, and episode 10 will have one as well. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'll be off to enjoy myself some delicious Gloomhand soup, only sold at Hylia's Rejects, only in locations on this side of Hyrule. Until next time, guys, bye-bye.